Chapter 7. The Model Millionaire. Oscar Wilde. Romance is the privilege of the rich, not the profession of the unemployed. The poor should be practical and prosaic. It is better to have a permanent income than to be fascinating. These are the great truths of modern life which Huey Erskine never realized. Intellectually, he was not of much importance, but he was wonderfully good-looking. With his crisp brown hair, clear-cut profile, and grey eyes, he was extremely popular and had every accomplishment except that of making money. He had tried everything. He had gone on the stock exchange for 6 months, and he had been a tea merchant for a little longer, but had soon tired of it. Ultimately, he became nothing, a delightful, ineffectual young man with a perfect profile and no profession. To make matters worse, he was in love with Laura Merton, the daughter of a retired colonel who was very fond of Huey, but would not hear of any engagement.
"Come to me, my boy, when you have got 10,000 pounds of your own, and we will see about it,"
he used to say. One morning, as Huey was on his way to where the Mertons lived, he dropped in to see a great friend of his, Alan Trevor. Trevor was a painter and an artist. Personally, he was a strange, rough fellow, with a freckled face and red, unruly hair. However, when he took up the brush, he was a real master, and his pictures were eagerly sought after. When Huey came in, he found Trevor putting the finishing touches to a wonderful life-size picture of a beggar. The beggar himself was standing on a platform in a corner of the studio. He was a wizened old man, with a face like wrinkled parchment and a most piteous expression. Over his shoulders was flung a coarse brown cloak, all tears and tatters. His thick boots were patched and cobbled, and with one hand he leant on a rough stick, while with the other he held out his battered hat for alms.
"What an amazing model,"
whispered Huey as he shook hands with his friend.
"An amazing model!"
shouted Trevor at the top of his voice.
"I should think so. Such beggars as he are not to be met with every day. Poor old chap,"
said Huey.
"How miserable he looks." "Certainly,"
replied Trevor.
"You don't want a beggar to look happy, do you?" "How much does a model get for sitting?"
asked Huey.
"A shilling an hour." "And how much do you get for your picture, Alan?" "Oh, for this I get 2,000 pounds. "Well, I think the models should have a percentage,"
cried Huey, laughing.
"They work quite as hard as you do." "Nonsense, nonsense! Why, look at the trouble of laying on the paint alone and standing all day long at one's easel. It's all very well, Huey, for you to talk, but I assure you that there are moments when art almost attains to the dignity of manual labor. But you must not chatter. I am very busy."
After some time the servant came in and told Trevor that the frame-maker wanted to speak to him. The old beggar man took advantage of Trevor's absence to rest for a moment on a wooden bench that was behind him. He looked so forlorn and wretched that Huey could not help pitying him, and felt in his pockets to see what money he had. All he could find was a sovereign and some coppers. He walked across the studio and slipped the sovereign into the beggar's hand. The old man started, and a faint smile flitted across his withered lips.
"Thank you, sir,"
he said.
"Thank you."
Then Trevor arrived, and Huey took his leave, blushing a little at what he had done. That night he strolled into the Palette Club about 11 o'clock and found Trevor sitting by himself.
"Well, Alan, did you get the picture finished all right?" finished and framed.
answered Trevor.
And by the by, you have made a conquest. That old model you saw is quite devoted to you. I had to tell him all about you. Who are you? Where you live? What your income is? What prospects you have? My dear Alan,
cried Huey.
I wish I could do something for him. I have got heaps of old clothes at home. Do you think he would care for any of them? Why, his rags were falling to bits. But he looks splendid in them,
said Trevor.
I wouldn't paint him in a frock coat for anything. And now tell me how Laura is. The old model was quite interested in her. You don't mean to say you talked to him about her?
Said Huey.
Certainly I did. He knows all about the relentless Colonel, the lovely Laura, and the 10,000 pounds. Why did you tell that old beggar all my private affairs?
Cried Huey, looking very red and angry.
My dear boy,
said Trevor, smiling.
That old beggar, as you call him, is one of the richest men in Europe. He could buy all London tomorrow without overdrawing his account. He has a house in every capital and dines off gold plates. The old man you saw today in the studio was Baron Horsberg. He's a great friend of mine, buys all my pictures and that sort of thing, and gave me a commission to paint him as a beggar. And I must say he made a magnificent figure in his rags, or perhaps I should say in my rags. They are an old suit I got in Spain. Baron Horsberg?
Cried Huey.
I gave him a sovereign.
And he sank into an armchair, the picture of dismay.
Gave him a sovereign?
Shouted Trevor, and he burst into a roar of laughter.
I think you might have told me, Alan,
said Huey sulkily,
and not have let me make such a fool of myself. Well,
said Trevor,
it never entered my mind that you went about distributing alms in the reckless way. What a duffer he must think me,
said Huey.
Not at all. He was in the highest spirits after you left, kept chuckling to himself and rubbing his hands together. I couldn't make out why he was so interested to know all about you, but I see it all now. He will invest your sovereign for you, Huey, pay you the interest every 6 months, and have a capital story to tell after dinner.
The next morning, as he was at breakfast, the servant announced the arrival of a messenger from Baron Horsberg.
I suppose he has come for an apology,
said Huey to himself, and he told the servant to show the visitor up. An old gentleman with gold spectacles came into the room and said in a slight French accent,
I have come from Baron Horsberg, the Baron. I beg, sir, that you will offer him my sincerest apologies,
stammered Huey.
The Baron,
said the old gentleman with a smile,
has commissioned me to bring you this letter.
And he extended a sealed envelope. On the outside was written, a wedding present to Hugh Erskine and Laura Merton from an old beggar, and inside was a cheque for 10,000 pounds. When they were married, Alan Trevor was the best man, and the Baron made a speech at the wedding breakfast.
Millionaire models,
remarked Alan,
are rare enough, but by Jove, model millionaires are rarer still.
A simple act of kindness can win hearts and bring happiness.